Alright, so just to set expectations here, not every game on this list takes place exclusively in space. However, space is a central theme of every game on this list, whether you're doing dogfighting, hanging out on a space station, or just exploring some bizarre new alien planet. And the reason that I wanted to make this video is because as much as I love high fantasy games in the vein of like Skyrim or something like Shadow of Mordor, I was also raised in a household that kept me on a very steady diet of science fiction. And that is thanks largely to my dad being a huge fan of things like Isaac Asimov or Star Trek The Next Generation, or a whole lot of Star Control back in the MS-DOS days, and no small amount of Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Tinkerbell's going down, pull up, Tinker! No!
And in turn for today's video, I really wanted to go over some games that explore worlds beyond our own. And if we're going to talk about exploring new worlds, I can think of no better game to kick this list off than No Man's Sky. Actually, scratch that real quick. Before we get started with No Man's Sky, quick side note, I did want to put Doom Eternal on this list, but the thing is, I already covered Doom Eternal in prior videos, and I really do try to make sure that I continue to put out new games on each successive video, so I'm not just talking about the same game over and over. But on that note, I actually did get Doom Eternal as part of my humble choice last month. The thing is, I already have that game and I don't need it, so here you go. If you want a copy, it's right here. Alright, back to No Man's Sky. So my experience with No Man's Sky, much like a lot of others, is a little bit checkered. I was one of those eager players who couldn't wait to play it during its launch back in 2016, but sadly, while it showed a ton of promise, No Man's Sky still fell victim to one of the biggest hype cycles in video game history, and a lot of the functionality players were hoping for wasn't exactly there out of the gate. Multiplayer functionality was hazy, and while it was a marvel of procedural generation creating quintillions of planets, it was pretty barren in those early days. And while I appreciated it for what it was, it didn't hold my interest very long. However, today, No Man's Sky is a much richer and more polished experience. After taking a critical beating during launch, Sean Murray and his team opted to go back and make things right, spending the next several years until present providing a ton of free updates to make the game everything players thought it would be at launch, throwing in new features like vehicles, portals, base building, and way more than I've even seen yet. So jumping back in on the deck was a real treat, and it was immediately clear to me that in 2023, No Man's Sky is much more approachable than it was at launch, with better direction when you start a new game. And in no time at all, I got to work exploring the dangerous conditions of the scorching hot planet I started on, before eventually repairing my ship and making my way to a much cooler climate in a neighboring planet. Upon my arrival, I was able to create a modest but functional base, and after about an hour or so, while it's not flashy, it's a start. And that was enough to remind me of No Man's Sky's chief strength: the joy of discovery. And while I'm featuring a bunch of other games on this list, this might have been the hardest one for me to pull myself away from. Deck performance was a little shoddy out of the gate, but after scaling back the graphics to a low setting, which still looked pretty stellar, and disabling GTAO, I was able to get to a much more steady 60 FPS with only occasional dips. Granted, I can't exactly test 18 quintillion planets or anything, but at least initially it seemed to run pretty smoothly at this setting. And having what might technically be the ultimate open world game scrunched down onto the deck for a quick session of base building or resource gathering feels pretty stunning. I'm not sure if I would make this the primary means by which I revisit the world of No Man's Sky, considering I've unlocked the Normandy on the Xbox version, but if you've been hesitant to dive back in, I can assure you it's definitely worth checking out, particularly if you haven't visited it since launch. And speaking of the Normandy, even though you technically can't board it in No Man's Sky, there is a place where you can board it, and that is in Mass Effect. So let's go ahead and take a look at Mass Effect 2. So I chose this because it was a space-based game that happened to be in my library, however it wasn't the Legendary Edition, but the original, which honestly felt more than a little off when I first fired it up. The controls weren't working well by default with a controller setup, and that was kind of a drag. But thanks to a happy accident, it turned out that the Legendary Edition was on sale for $14.99, so I went ahead and grabbed it. However, since I've only ever beat the first Mass Effect, I'm only covering 2 from the collection here, since I selfishly don't want to spoil anything for myself in the third act. Now, I have started Mass Effect 2 before, so I had some idea of what to expect, but I forgot how much more I enjoyed the Legendary Edition over the original experience. For starters, there's a nice motion comic you can enjoy to get a better idea of what happened in the first game, and make some decisions that will better customize who your Commander Shepard is this go-around, assuming you're not carrying over a prior save from Mass Effect 1. Beyond that, there's also a photo mode, which I always appreciate, and while the technical side of Mass Effect 2's graphics are definitely showing their age, artistically speaking, it's still a beautiful game, from the slickly stylized lighting that you encounter in each new area, to the incredible character and ship designs. The gameplay is still fun as you engage stop-and-pop tactics with your enemies, and slow time to issue some lightweight squad commands to find the right combination of firepower and abilities for each encounter. Personally, I never thought it was the smoothest experience, but it feels a lot better than the original Mass Effect, and the thing that keeps me coming back to these games is mostly the writing, which is just top-notch. And deciding how to respond to any given situation remains engaging as you forge Shepard's personality throughout your adventure. And while I don't think the morality system totally sidesteps the extremes of cartoonish villain and insufferable Boy Scout, it remains entertaining even 10 years on. Plus, if you do spring for the Legendary Edition, it's definitely been cleaned up over the original with improved lighting and textures. Character models look better overall, but they still occasionally have that dead-in-the-eyes ventriloquist dummy look. But to be fair, the game did just turn 13 years old, and without those character models we wouldn't have gotten those adorable memes from, well, 13 years ago. The point is, even as someone who hasn't finished the original trilogy, I can tell you it's well worth revisiting, and the deck is a great place to do it considering you can run at maximum settings with a pretty solid 60 FPS, save for maybe the occasional dip during a cutscene. Next up is another collection of games that is slightly hampered on the Steam Deck if I'm being honest. However, what is there is so overflowing with gameplay value that I couldn't not include it here, and that is the Master Chief Collection. Now, if I'm being honest, in the early days of Halo I wasn't very impressed. In fact, I didn't even play the original Halo at launch, and it wasn't until a year later when Splinter Cell was touted as an Xbox exclusive that I finally caved and entered the world of Xbox. But as I developed a growing fondness for Microsoft's console, the Halo 2 launch wasn't far around the corner, and after spending an irresponsible amount of time playing thousands of matches on Xbox Live, my love of the series was solidified. But it had been years since I returned to anything pre-Halo 5. So when I found the Master Chief Collection on sale sometime back, I figured it would be amazing to revisit those earlier days of the franchise in one convenient package on the Steam Deck, if for no other reason than playing Halo on a handheld sounded pretty incredible. And it is incredible, again with just a few caveats. For starters, the original Halo seems to be having issues, at least presently. I did some poking around on Reddit, and apparently it worked fine in some prior updates, but it appears to be having trouble at the moment. And when I actually did try to play it, I had the frame rate drop to literal unplayable levels before just sort of getting stuck, and well, that's kind of a bummer. The other thing that kinda sucks is you can't play multiplayer here because of anti-cheat. Although apparently they're working on getting it functional on the deck, but at least as of this recording, I don't believe it's possible to do so. But with those two admittedly big asterisks out of the way, you can still play the campaigns of Halo 2, Halo 3, Halo 3 ODST, Halo Reach, and Halo 4, and at a high level after testing each, they run extremely well on the Steam Deck. And it was very cool getting to revisit these games and really appreciate how well they hold up today. Whether you're stepping into the boots of Master Chief or Noble Six, every one of these titles has their merits. And it still feels awesome mowing down grunts in the jungle or sneaking through the ruins of New Mombasa. There's just a whole lot of story to work with across these 5 titles, and the gameplay is still thrilling for games that are either already or very nearly 20 years old at this point. Deck performance was smooth throughout, and it's also really interesting to look at the progression of the franchise as a whole and see what gameplay improvements were made from one entry to the next. So if you're not so hot on Infinite and find yourself yearning for the Chief's earlier conflicts, the Master Chief Collection is still a great way to dive into some tightly designed first-person shooter action. Next up, stepping away from AAA fare in favor of something that's AA or maybe A&a-half, if that's a thing, would be Red Faction Guerrilla Remastered. To be fair, while I totally see what they did there, that is kind of a goofy title. But there is still a lot of fun to be had if you're willing to stick with Red Faction Guerrilla Remastered, because I have to tell you, this one almost didn't make the cut for me. It has a really weird control layout, the graphics are serviceable but jank around the edges, and vehicle handling is all over the place, but despite all of these initial turnoffs, I stuck with it, and you know what? I'm glad I did, because after about 30 minutes or so, it really starts to open up tremendously and has a really satisfying gameplay loop. In Red Faction Guerrilla, you'll take on the role of Alec Mason, a mining engineer who arrives on Mars to reunite with his brother and start fresh. Unfortunately, the Earth Defense Force treats the Martian people pretty terribly, and in no time at all you'll be joined up with the Red Faction in an effort to take them down and liberate your fellow Mars inhabitants from EDF's cruelty. Now that's a fine setup, I guess, but honestly just about anything plot-wise takes a very fast backseat to the most notable feature, the incredibly fun destructible environments. This is thanks to Volition's Geomod 2.0 technology, which makes this, no pun intended, a real blast to run around in and just wreak absolute havoc. And the Guerrilla name is completely appropriate. If you try to take on a stronghold by your lonesome and go in guns blazing, then you're likely to get wrecked pretty quickly. But if you're willing to do a little bit of prep or use attack and retreat tactics to run in, set off a bunch of explosives, and slip out amidst the chaos for better positioning, you stand a pretty good chance of making some headway. More so, if you continue to complete missions and bolster the morale of the Resistance, this will help you gain scrapper upgrades at a faster rate, and see your allies more frequently join the fray when taking on the EDF. Like I mentioned before, it's hardly a flawless title, and my critical instincts kicked in pretty quickly with so-so graphics on display and forgettable characters. However, that being said, it's still a whole lot of fun feeling like you're gradually building up a resistance that can overcome the odds, and continually upgrading your tools of destruction along the way kept things pretty satisfying. And as a slightly older title from 2018 that's a remaster of the 2009 original, deck performance is solid even with graphical settings maxed out. You'll still see some pretty heinous textures here and there and some occasional pop-in, but again, if you go in with reserved expectations, I promise there's a lot of fun to be had here. And last but not least is a fairly recent title, and one that's honestly becoming kind of a fast favorite for me the more time that I spend with it, and that is Chorus. So I mentioned this in my pickups video last month as a game that I overlooked for a whole year before finally diving in, but now that I have taken the leap, wow, this is just another one of those games that I can't believe I waited so long to check out. In Chorus, you'll play as Nara, a pilot with a checkered past, but now that I have some more insight into that, I really like how the story is shaking out. I won't spoil it, but I will say that it's a lot deeper and way less linear than I thought it would be. There really is a lot of freedom of exploration here, and in between the moments of choosing whether to fly across the galaxy to a side mission or to beeline the main story, Nara will monologue internally with extra flavor whenever you encounter other characters or situations. It definitely gave me Senua vibes from Hellblade, but in a good way. Beyond a deeper appreciation for the story on offer, I'm also really liking the way your ship handles in this game. I'm always a little iffy when it comes to spacefaring games, and more so when you're talking about dogfighting, which you'll be doing a lot of in Chorus. But the controls feel really smooth with your directions controlled on the right stick and your acceleration on the left. But you can always click in R3 to recenter your ship and level out if you get stuck at an odd or, well, I guess relatively odd angle to your surroundings. Chorus also does a great job of communicating speed to you with multiple levels of acceleration. You can cruise along by pushing the left stick up, accelerate much more dramatically with the left trigger to dodge incoming fire, and when you're out in open space you can engage a warp drive of sorts to travel great distances while still having decent maneuverability. When you reach a new area, there are also warp gates that you can use to hit a speed somewhere between boosting and your warp drive, so you can get around a moderately sized area more efficiently than either slow boosting from A to B or, warp driving your way through a wall or something by accident. The layout of the menus is clean and easy to understand, which makes it a lot of fun to decide which mission you'll undertake next, or if you'll take it back to the hangar for some upgrades as you continue to earn or find credits in the open world. And the side missions are really interesting as well. One of the first I performed was an optional mission to escort what I think was a friend to drop off some cargo so she could pay off a debt to some space pirates. I ended up picking up the tab for her, but it was really nice doing a mission that wasn't just immediately focused on shooting things, and I really didn't expect that given a game that so heavily features these gorgeous combat sequences in its trailer footage. But make no mistake, this game is gorgeous, and combat is a whole lot of fun when bouncing between your Gatling gun, lasers, missiles, and the like. And all of it looked very polished on the deck while keeping a steady 60 frames per second, even pushing the graphics to ultimate quality left it in the high 50s, so I gotta say, it was just really impressive all around. I'm not sure how long this game will take to beat, or how well this quality will hold up in the long term, but I will say that in the midst of capturing footage for this video, it was really hard to put down, and I can't wait to spend more time with this game. Alright, so that's it for this one, and honestly I thought about going super narrow on this and only doing just space shooters instead of exploring a kind of a range of different genres within that kind of sci-fi space setting, but maybe I'll do something different in a future video. But for now, is there anything that you would recommend on the Steam Deck that is very much space themed or within the realm of sci-fi? If so, I would love to hear about it. As always, thank you so much for taking your time to watch these videos. It means a ton to me. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.